Today I'm going to be doing a voiceover for our BTS Teardown Part 1. The main reason is because we had music playing in the background and we would get a copyright infringement for YouTube. And the second reason is going to be because it's obviously, noisy in the shop, so this is probably more pleasant to listen to. Here I'm going to show you how to take the washers off the pump bolts, and I'm only going to do one in order to save time. This particular unit, I believe, was installed in the truck for about 9 years. It's never been apart. It was put together by Brian at BTS. He's a pretty well-known 4R100 builder. I'm basically documenting this because I haven't had to take a BTS apart to date. So I'm not sure what I'm going to find inside this transmission. This truck did have the transmission out of it, I think, about 3 years ago in order to fix a either an input or a converter or both when it spun the shaft or, the splines off the shaft or something. But besides that, I don't think that the transmission has been gone through since it was originally built. Here I'm attacking the main valve body, and there are 3 different length bolts that go in the main valve body. The 2 shortest bolts technically don't have to come out, but since I'm cleaning everything anyway, I'm just taking everything apart. Not only that, it's easier to show you guys what's going on. And as you can see, that little separator plate, it's pretty dirty, so we're going to get that cleaned up. And then I'm going to take this main valve body off, and I'm going to show you that this is a 4-ball unit. And there is 1, 2, 3, and 4, and nothing in that bathtub or trough, whatever you want to call it. So the outside 2 balls are 1/4 inch, the inside 2 balls are 3/16. The next thing that I'm going to attack here is going to be the valve body stiffener plate. It's held in with 2 little bolts. Now these little bolts have like a little self-alignment tab on the bottom of the bolt that is not present on the center support bolts, and I like to make sure that I don't get those mixed up. That's kind of why I wanted to point that out to you. Here I'm taking the accumulator body off. This is absolutely where the most modification is done in the valve body area. When I pull this thing off, I'm going to look and make sure there's nothing crazy going on. I don't see anything that's like majorly out of place. And I will be going through that valve body in much greater detail a little bit later on. But for now, I'm just getting this unit torn down. And here I'm looking at the differences in the inputs. I'm not sure what brand input BTS uses, but it's not a factory input shaft. You can tell because the splines are milled right into the shaft itself. Next, I'm taking the solenoid body out. This solenoid body, I don't like to pry to get it out. I like to use a little rubber mallet in order to pop it out. As a general rule of thumb, you always replace a solenoid body anytime you're doing a rebuild, and I only use OEM. In this particular case, you can see I'm pointing at a different color solenoid. When you have a different colored solenoid right there, that indicates that this is a pulse width modulated unit. You do not want to get a non-pulse width and a pulse width modulated solenoid body mixed up in one of these units. I'm showing you one of the differences in the valve body separator plate gasket. You're going to save that gasket, and there's a little filter or screen, whatever you want to call it, that's on that plate, and I just usually inspect it, and in this case it just had a little bit of clutch material in it, so it gets thrown away and a new one comes in the paper rubber kit. And look at the clutch material on the Transgo shift plate. We are going to get that cleaned up, and I'm showing you some more modifications to the main valve body plate that I guess Brian does. Never throw these pieces of paper away, always save them. And I'm showing you where the part number is on the bottom of that main valve body plate. If you ever have a damaged plate, you have to get the same one. That was the EPC solenoid, I'm sorry, the EPC spring and ball that goes on the top. That looked like it had a Transgo ball on the top that's got like a little cone on the top of it. Once again, do not throw away your papers that go to your plate. That's the servo that applies the band on the direct drive drum. Now I'm taking the feed bolts out. 2 feed bolts are the same. One's different. I'm not sure if they've been modified or not, but I'll measure them and compare them to a stock unit. Now I'm counting the check balls that are in the valve body housing of the transmission itself. And you'll notice that I pointed to a trough or a bathtub that's near the bottom that does not have a ball in it. Some units have a 9th ball right there, but in this particular case, this unit had 8 1/4-inch balls. Some people will put the transmission on its side and they'll use the input shaft to kind of pop the pump out. That absolutely works. But I made this little jig and I just screw it in by hand and it threads into the pump itself. And once I've got it threaded in, I can just pop the pump out using the little gun that I have there. Just got to be real careful. You don't want to force anything. And the lug nuts will actually spin kind of like a bearing puller. And the reason I use lug nuts is because they were free. I had them just laying around. The jig that's holding the transmission up, I made it as well. It's not required, but it certainly makes life easier. That's a thrust washer that goes on the back of the pump. It was intact, so I didn't have to do anything with it. It'll be reused. And here I'm taking the pump apart, and I'm really getting annoyed with the fact that I got to keep grabbing the socket because the snap ring is missing off my gun. I'm gonna have to get that fixed. I probably, yep. I have one of my other guys go grab me a gun here while I'm doing this. Gonna do the little gun switch out. And we're set. This is the first little bit of damage I found. Both the inner and the outer gear for the pump have wear marks on them. And I'm going to use a punch here to kind of point out the little wear mark, but probably could have done a better job on the video for that. My mistake. I just checked the bushing in the pump. It looks to be in good shape. I'm taking the seal off of the pump. Now, if that truck, had overheated that transmission really bad, sometimes that seal will be really hard and brittle, and it'll break into multiple pieces while I'm trying to take it apart. But obviously, this transmission has not been severely overheated, so that wasn't an issue. Here, I'm very carefully trying to pry this seal out of the pump housing. I'm making sure I'm not damaging the aluminum housing at all. I'm using very small little hammer taps. And you'll see me run my finger right around the lip there to make sure everything's good and no damage. I do have a bushing driver tool that I made for the pump to install a new pump bushing. But in the event that there's an issue with the pump bushing, I almost always just buy a new pump. And right there, I just checked the springs, and now I'm taking the seals off for the front pump. Everything looked to be in good shape. I'm going to take all of that apart in much greater detail when I do the accumulator body a little bit later on. There is the pump to case gasket. For not being apart in 8, 9, whatever years, 10 years, looks to be in good shape. It's not baked. It did come out in multiple pieces, but I've seen that happen on a unit that's only a year old, so nothing crazy. Looks good. Now I'm taking the input sensor out, I'll re-O-ring that, clean it up, and put it back in. There was no codes, no circuit codes or anything like that, so I should be able to put that right back in. I should mention that I'm doing a very, like a most valuable, like refresh or rebuild, whatever you want to call it. I'm not replacing anything that doesn't need to be replaced. That little yellow thing is the Overdrive sprag. I will make sure that the little balls, the little rollers in there, and the little springs are all in good shape. And then the snap ring that's holding the coast clutch drum together there is not factory, but it's also not the one that comes in the Transgo kit. So here I am just measuring the snap ring just so that I, make sure I put this thing back together 100% the same way that it came apart. And that's not welded. I don't know if Brian does that or not, but that's something that I do. I'll weld the coast clutch drum. In this unit I won't, but it is something that I've done, or that I do on my units. As mentioned before, this is just kind of like a refresh. The transmission did great for 8 or 9 years. Let's just put it back together the exact same way that it was, and hopefully it lasts another 8 or 9 years without issue. Here I'm looking for any kind of damage, overheating, hot spots, warpage, anything like that on the coast clutch drum. I didn't see any. I'm going to take this snap ring out. That's a factory snap ring that holds the overdrive plates in. And you can see this is the first clutch damage that I found. And this is the intermediate shaft. It looks to be stock. I'm going to compare it to another unit that we have apart. And right now I'm checking the little planetaries inside there. That will get taken further apart when I'm cleaning the accumulator body and the pump. Now I'm going to take the next snap ring out, and it requires a special tool. And I'm going to find out that this snap ring is significantly thicker than